So everyone enjoy the first session?
Yeah.
Woo! All right. So I'm going to introduce Tito and Tara. I had the privilege of going and seeing some of LexisNexis's kickoffs earlier this year, and I felt like I was a kid at Christmas, and luckily it was right after Christmas. Actually, it was probably much less, in some ways, much more enjoyable than Christmas because it wasn't about like waking up early and like kids ravishing through presents. But I could really tell that they've put together an organization that really has a passion for relevance and the problems of search quality. They think very deeply about build a whole team around how we do human evaluation, build a whole team around how we do analytics evaluation, relevance algorithms, measurement and A/B tests. All of these things are really important and passionate to them. And so it's really refreshing to go to a place and see a team that really gets at a fundamental level many of these issues. I think I'll also plug, if you're looking for a fantastic place to grow, an ecosystem to grow in these issues, definitely check them out. They're a fantastic organization to learn about. Tara and Tito. Tara leads the product teams on search optimization, including new search algorithms with new metrics and testing methods. Tito is the big leader of the search team over at Lexis. He's very passionate about search quality. He leads the product strategy for helping to improve search quality. He's got a tremendous amount of experience. He's a fantastic person to talk to and learn from if you have a chance to after the talk. Very passionate about data-driven product development across their product suite globally. And Lexis and legal search definitely have a tough and interesting problem. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Tito and Tara.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So today we are good. Is this on? I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Yes, great, wonderful. Okay, so today we are going to be making the case for human relevance testing. Just a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk a little bit about us. Then what is human relevance testing? Why do human relevance testing? Then we're going to spend a bunch of time looking at establishing a human relevance testing program, and then we'll wrap up by looking at some lessons learned.
Before jumping in, I wanted to thank the organizers for setting us up with this time slot, because it's warm in this room and these seats are very comfy. So I feel like I'm in a much better position than the afternoon presenters, because you guys are going to fall asleep. But actually, on a more serious note, I thought it was great to sync our presentation up with the presentation that preceded us, because Alessandro did, I think, in the beginning of his presentation, a great job providing context around the importance of evaluation. And what you're going to get from our presentation is a little bit more of a case study approach on how we approach it at LexisNexis and kind of the practical considerations of doing a more holistic program around relevance evaluation. You got this great introduction from Doug, so we're not going to spend too much time on this. A little bit of context about our organization. We actually do a lot of search, and we've been doing search for quite a long time. So Lexis has a heritage of doing electronic-based textual search since the 1970s. And I'll show a photo in a few slides where I can prove that to you. But in terms of our organizational context, we're in the legal and professional space. So most of our products, the majority of our revenue is based on legal market. So if you know any lawyers, they're probably subscribing to our products and doing their legal research on our products. We have a global presence. Although the majority of the revenue is in North America, we have a pretty big business in the UK. We have a big business in Asia-Pacific markets. We have a business in China, in the Middle East and Europe market. So we really have a true global presence. Part of a broader theme that we're going to talk about today is establishing a program around relevance evaluation. And in our context, we have dozens of products. And so part of what we've been focusing on in the last couple of years is standing up a program that can scale to support a large number of products globally. And we'll get into that in a minute. In terms of who our users are, so who's actually running searches on our products, we have a variety of personas. They cluster into a few different categories. Attorneys are probably the biggest users or the most important users. So attorneys that are doing research in preparation for a case, or an attorney that's perhaps wanting to figure out how to file a bankruptcy in a particular jurisdiction, we have the best collection of content in which to get that information. And so they'll go in and use the product to find that information. We also support a pretty large amount of usage from librarians and information professionals. So in large law firms, they typically have a library organization or a support organization that does research on their behalf. And so one of the big interesting challenges that we have as a search company is that we have customers that have been running search in our products for over 20 years. And so some of those folks grew up pre-internet in terms of doing searches, very complex search, Boolean searching, nested Booleans with proximity operators, basically quoted terms, really complex types of searching. And so then we have students, and students typically don't do all that, and they'll type in a couple of keywords and expect the search engine to magically understand what they want. And we have to get both right, which is a really, really tough problem. Just a couple screenshots on what our products look like at a high level in terms of search. So we're really talking about textual-based search here, and common pattern in terms of search retrieval of having document matches, post-search faceted filtering, keyword and context highlighting. We have another cool feature that's a graphical representation, but that's going to create too much interest and will sidetrack us from the main topic. So if you're interested in that, talk to me. But we have a really cool way of visualizing hits in results. So why do human relevance testing? So I think a lot of companies are pretty well invested in doing some kind of analytics-based, engagement-based tracking of how users are searching their product. We do that too. We do it fairly extensively. We have a pretty robust A/B testing platform to track how well search is performing from an engagement perspective. But that's not what today's topic is about. So we're not going to talk about that. That's maybe a topic for another presentation, maybe next year. We're going to talk about the human relevance testing part of what we do. So this is offline subject matter expert evaluation. So this is basically a proxy for the user that in an offline context is being able to evaluate how well is search performing in our product using explicit ratings and explicit judgment. So there's a lot of benefits to doing this. We'll touch upon a few of them at a high level, but one of them is that it's offline. So if you can imagine doing an experimental algorithm and you're not really sure how well it's going to perform, in some markets, in some products, you can have a very high tolerance for experimentation. In our market, we have customers that do the same searches on a regular basis, have been doing the same search for years. And so for us to do large-scale experimentation with them and use the product as a guinea pig can be a bit of a challenge for us. So the offline evaluation method allows us to really test out a completely new approach in a way that's safe, because it's not going to necessarily significantly change the product experience for the customer in a negative way. So part of it is mismitigation. The other part is that unlike other methods that we use for evaluation, such as analytics or metrics-driven evaluation metrics, with offline evaluation, we have an opportunity to get at, not just answer the question of, is the relevance change that we made better or not? We can actually try to understand, well, what's wrong with relevance in the product right now? And with subject matter experts giving feedback, we actually have a transparent feedback loop to understand why is relevance not working well. With a pure analytics-based approach, you could say, well, this algorithm didn't perform well, but you don't really know why. With this evaluation method, you can actually get at why. I think it's worth, at a high level, talking about that there's different approaches to doing search relevance evaluation. And I'd like to highlight a couple of different approaches at a high level. On the left here, there's a concept we like to call results list evaluation. And that's really evaluating the quality of a set of results as a group, versus document level evaluation, which is evaluating the overall quality of search based on evaluation of the relevance of individual documents in the results set. It's a subtle difference, but it's actually quite important. Most of what we've focused on in the last couple of years in doing our human relevance testing program is the one on the right, is document level. And with document level, you can do things like compute DCG. The option on the left is actually one that we're starting to explore more. And it's particularly useful in contexts where having diversity of a result list is important, because then you can look at overall, is this a good result set for a query, as opposed to, are the documents returned relevant or not? It's a subtle difference, but we're finding that these are complementary methods for evaluation. Okay, I think Tara's going to talk about, actually, is this still me? Oh,
It's still
sorry.
you.
Right. Oh, remember before I was talking about the history that LexisNexis has in doing search since the 1970s. So this is an example of one of our terminals. This is actually one that I own. Somebody gave it to me. And it's actually a terminal. I believe this one is circa like 1980, 1981. But we actually had proprietary terminals where the customers bought access to the content, and we actually did transactional search pricing. And then we actually provided them with a terminal that had a dial-up connection to go to a proprietary mainframe server to get the results. So the company's been doing search for quite a long time. And it's interesting, it's telling to think that despite search, Lexis doing search back in the 70s, that 30 years later, 40 years later, we're still investing in trying to make search better. And we haven't actually solved it. Legal search is a really, really challenging problem. Similar, I would say, on scale to medical search. And we're actually investing much more in search now than we have previously. And the main reason for that is we do, I think many companies do Net Promoter Score surveys, which is a way to kind of email your customers to get a sense of how well they like your product or like your company. And we have been doing that for a really, really long time. And when we analyze the key drivers for satisfaction with our company and with our product, which includes a number of factors, including things like pricing, or how good is your content, how good is your user experience, how good is your customer support, your sales. So you can imagine all of the things that customers can evaluate you on in terms of satisfaction. Search dominates the top reasons why the customers promote the product, but also dominates the top reasons why they detract and then they wouldn't promote the product. And for our market and our business, getting search right is mission critical. Like, if we get it wrong, we're not going to get renewals for our products. We're going to have a difficult time competing against our competitor. And so despite the fact that we've been doing this for almost 40 years, it continues to be an area where we continually need to invest. So the topic is human relevance testing, so we're going to get into more detail about how we approach it, the mechanics of it. We started doing this more rigorous methodology in 2016, focusing on our US market and our flagship Lexis Advanced Legal Research product. That first couple of years was about really ironing out our methodologies, our processes, building our tooling around this. We have built a fair amount of tooling. And then in the last year, in 2018, we started expanding this to our global suite of products. So we've actually, and this is where Tara comes in, she's leading the program around this relevance evaluation. And in the last year, we've been working on applying this methodology and approach to a large number of products. And we're working on scaling the methodology and the tooling to support this type of evaluation. I'm going to end my section on talking about the applications of doing this type of analysis. So one basic thing is just to answer the question, how good is search in our product? So getting a baseline evaluation of what's working well in search versus what's not working well. My experience in working on search for a little bit over 15 years is that any search system, you have types of queries where the system works adequately, types of queries where it works very effectively, and you always have types of queries where it works very, very poorly. There's a distribution there. And part of this approach is to give us very specific examples of the types of searches that don't work well, and therefore you can focus your energy on addressing those issues. We also use it to evaluate quality over time, and this turns out to be a really good organizational driver, because we can set goals for our team on being able to show year-over-year improvement in search metrics. And so by tracking this as a program as opposed to a one-off, you can actually build a process towards continuous improvement, continuous optimization, which is super important if search is really core to your product. We also use the methodology for evaluating new algorithms. So we've established a baseline, and we're able to, our approach, to recycle the ratings that we get. And so when we test a new experimental algorithm, we actually use the same methodology with targeted query sets to see whether or not the new algorithm is better than the baseline. And so that targeted type of evaluation approaches can be really powerful to know whether or not an algorithm that you're testing out is ready to go live, or whether it needs to go back to the lab for additional tuning before you go live. We also use it for new search engine evaluations. So we're actually doing a fair amount of work right now preparing for migrating some of our products to new search engines. As you can imagine, changing a search engine is changing basically the fundamental base core of how the search works. In the absence of a robust testing methodology, there's a lot of risk to changing to a search engine. So we've been using it for that purpose as well. And then the last one is a very interesting one, which is competitive benchmarking, where I won't go into too much detail on this one, but it is theoretically possible to be able to compare for the same set of queries how well your product works versus how well your competitor's product works. And that can be really powerful in terms of identifying where the gaps are and where your competitive advantages are relative to your competitors, and can be a really big motivator for your team, right? So human beings are generally very competitive, and so knowing that your competitor is much better at search in a particular way is a driver for you to want to improve.
All right, thank you. So I'm now going to talk about establishing a human relevance testing program. So we believe that investment in a robust framework for human relevance testing can pay dividends in terms of the benefits that you'll derive. And we'll be talking about the benefits based on first-hand experience in a few minutes. But first, let's look at what a robust framework might look like. So at LexisNexis, our framework includes selecting and managing raters, selecting test queries, collecting ratings, generating scores, and finally analyzing and communicating results. We're going to look at each of those in turn, starting with raters, who are obviously critical to successful human relevance testing. So when it comes to selecting raters, some considerations are subject matter expertise. Now, this is not always requires, that will depend on the product, but certainly at LexisNexis, the majority of our products do require our raters to have domain expertise, in particular our legal research products. Our raters also need to be well versed in different techniques of searching. So Tito already alluded to the different personas we have using our products and the history we have, and that means that there's a wide variety of searching going on in our product. Everything from short natural language queries to very lengthy, complex Boolean queries. And our raters need to be able to interpret all of those. Another consideration when it comes to rater selection is cost or available budget. So raters' time comes with a cost. So depending on the product and the available budget for that product, we use both dedicated rater teams as well as ad hoc teams. When we're using ad hoc teams, we often look to source raters internally. That's a great way of managing costs and can sometimes also be a great way to get that domain knowledge that we're looking for. It does, however, mean that we are requiring our raters to prioritize this work alongside their day job, which leads to the final consideration, which is rater capacity. It is really important to understand how much commitment, time commitment your raters can give to you, and to make sure that aligns to your goals. So once you've got your rater selected, it's then time to think about rater management. And some considerations here are rating guidelines and training. So at LexisNexis, we always train our raters and do issue them with rating guidelines. This is really to provide them with a frame of reference and also to ensure some degree of consistency. We find it's really important, in particular when dealing with user queries, because these can be really difficult to interpret the user intent. So the guidelines really help the users, help the raters deal with some of those more challenging queries. Even with guidelines, raters still do not always agree. And in fact, we don't always expect them to agree. We take the view that we are asking our raters to exercise their judgment. So a degree of disagreement is in fact healthy. But it is really important to keep an eye on rater consistency just to make sure that you don't have any fundamental differences in approach amongst your raters, which could lead to skewed results. We do use metrics which can be really helpful in managing raters. We use a combination of IRR, inter-rater reliability, which we heard about earlier this morning. We also track things like average rating scores and average time spent for each review. And this all together helps us kind of flag any potential issues and intervene if necessary. And intervene sounds like a very strong word, but often that simply means just getting the raters together for half an hour and really allowing them to discuss amongst themselves and align amongst themselves. That often is really all it takes to get a team back on track. So now that you have your raters, it's time to think about the test queries you're going to use. So some query attributes to think about here are actual user queries versus constructed queries. So we always use actual user queries sourced from our user logs. But if that's not possible, it is, of course, also an option to construct queries. Other attributes to consider are anonymized queries versus user-specific queries. Again, we always use anonymized queries, but there may be circumstances where you wish to evaluate queries from a particular customer. But even in that case, from a rater's perspective, certainly the way we do our tests, they are always blind. So our raters would never know the source of the query. So that anonymity, there would still be a degree of anonymity so far as the raters are concerned. So human relevance testing can be really difficult to scale. So using randomly sourced queries is a really great way to ensure that the query set you're working with is representative in the absence of being able to test all the queries that you'd probably ideally like to test. So that is generally our starting point. But as Tito mentioned, when we're evaluating specific algorithms, it may be more appropriate to work with targeted query sets. So we kind of start with the broader representative sets and then move to more curated sets where appropriate. And finally, even when using random sets, it is still worth considering whether there are any queries which just aren't suited for relevance evaluation. A great example here is what we call navigational queries, and this is where the user intent is to find a specific document rather than a results list. Those generally don't lend themselves well to this type of testing. And then just a final note on selecting queries is that your rater capacity will always limit the number of queries that can be tested. And it is really important to scope your studies accordingly. So from experience, having tests that run on and on and on can be really demoralizing. And also, if you're unable to complete a test, it's really difficult to extract any data, and it largely becomes throwaway. So kind of maybe taking a slightly more cautious approach, and particularly when doing your first test, is really, really desirable.
I have a comment. So with this issue of the number of queries to test, we sometimes get feedback, well, is this statistically significant? Is there enough queries to really understand? Obviously, the more queries you can test, the more ratings data you collect, the more robust the results are. But it's a matter of degrees, and it's also a matter of practicality. Certainly, if you test 100 randomly sourced queries, and you're able to establish with 20 queries representing a particular query type that your search engine is completely broken, that is completely failing to return relevant results, that's useful. And it's key, you know, in my experience, oftentimes the hesitation in wanting to invest in this type of approach due to the cost is due to a lack of understanding as to what kind of value can be derived from it. So we've had many examples of case studies where we've started very small pilots of tests with a small number of queries. And as a result of completing the test and sharing the results and digging into the details, get significant interest and buy-in from product management, from engineers regarding the findings that then prompts a desire to want to do more analysis. So it's rarely been the case that we've done a study and then the team says, well, okay, well, that was a waste of time. It's usually, can we do more? Because you actually start uncovering some of the underlying factors that are contributing to search quality in a more tangible way than if you were just looking at an aggregate metric.
Okay. Right, so now we have our raters, we have our test queries. It's time to collect some ratings. So first is you'll need to select your rating scale. As you can see over here, and I'm going to try the highlighting now. Oh, no. Woo, right, I'm just about there. As you can see over here on the right, this is our rating toolbar. And you can see there we use a scale of 1 to 4, one being low and 4 being high. But this could be whatever you choose. It could be 1 to 5, 1 to 10. We use 1 to 4 for because we don't want raters to kind of fall in the middle and consistently select 3. So that's kind of a bit of thinking around that scale. Other things to consider are how many reviews you want to gather for each document. So gathering multiple reviews can be really helpful. We always collect 3 reviews for each result, and we find that works really well, and that enables us to do, in the absence of agreement, to use a majority rules approach. Another consideration is also the rank depth you want to rate to. So typically, is this going to be are you going to rate the top 5 results or the top 10 results? This often can go back to your rater capacity because it's twice the work to go to a depth of 10. So it's really a consideration of whether you want to go for deep or broad. And so just something to have in mind. And finally, again, looking over here at our toolbar, you can see we have a comments box. And I can't emphasize enough how useful rater verbatims are. We don't make them mandatory, they are optional, but we do strongly encourage them. And our raters are, in fact, very diligent around leaving comments. We ask them to pay particular attention when giving a low score, and I think that really helps. So they're not always leaving comments, but if they're giving a 1 or a 2, they're really good about leaving comments, which we can then analyze when we're digging into what the low-performing queries look like, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So we've now finished the ratings, and it's time to generate scores. So this is done at a query level, and you could use any number of metrics for this. I think we've heard about a range of them in some of the talks earlier this morning. At LexisNexis, we use DCG, or Discounted Cumulative Gain, which is an industry standard. And you can see here on the right, this is a sample DCG report where we've computed DCG 3, 5, and 10. And you can see here we have the individual query scores, and then we have the rolled up average at the top. And DCG works by taking the individual document score and discounting it based on the position of that document in the results list. So that's how you end up with these odd-looking scores like this, as opposed to nice round numbers that we start with on our 1 to 4 scale. So now you have your scores, and you may be tempted to think, job done, okay. But that would be really missing a big opportunity to maximize the value you derive from your test. we have found that investing time in low-scoring query analysis can deliver great insights into how our users are searching, the challenges they're facing, and also areas for improvement. So we spend a lot of time looking at low-scoring queries, doing things like looking at the queries themselves for any common attributes, and then, of course, looking at the rater comments to really understand from a user's perspective what the pain points are. And then we also do search diagnostics, sometimes looking at how a query is being processed under the covers can deliver great insights as well. And really, all this is with a view to formulating some key themes and recommendations that can be then shared with the appropriate teams, which is a great segue to communication of results. So surprisingly, this often gets forgotten. And so we very deliberately build it in as a step in our process before we call a test done. Because we believe that communication, if you don't communicate the results, you're not deriving the value out of your test. So we will typically do readouts of findings, including any recommendations as well with our development teams, product teams, and other interested stakeholders. And really, this is a great opportunity to educate and engage with teams using very specific and real examples of where the search is not performing well. And it's also an opportunity to really kind of demonstrate how relevance quality can be measured, because for some people this will absolutely be a new concept, and that this is a great way to do it in a really tangible way. So now you are done, right? You've communicated your results. And now it's time to think about what next. And this is really where you see the shift from a one-off test to an ongoing program of relevance testing. And we have found that by using the framework we've just outlined, this can happen pretty much organically. And so I'll just talk about a couple of examples around how this can happen. So you've got your baseline, and hopefully with this you also you've generated a nice backlog of search enhancements which your team are now working on. So you can now use human relevance testing to evaluate those changes before putting them in front of customers. We have found that using human relevance testing to evaluate new algorithms not only improves quality, but it can also improve time to market. And there are a couple of different drivers behind that. One of those is the reuse that Tito already mentioned. So when we are evaluating an algorithm, we're evaluating it against an existing baseline. So we're reusing all the ratings that have previously been gathered. And if you, oh, nope, wrong button. Oh, no, really wrong button. Let's go back, no, forward. All right, I wanted to do this. So if you look over here where the raters are grading new top documents, they are only grading new top documents that weren't previously in the top results and therefore had no ratings. Any documents that have simply moved rank as a result of the new algorithm, for those we preserve the rating, and so we don't need to re-rate those. So that's one way we improve time to market. The other way is human relevance testing gives development teams a great way of testing and iterating on their work quickly, and it also gives them the data to make confident recommendations to product. This is opposed to what I would consider old school, which is you have your development team off here developing, then they hand it over to product to test, and then you get a much slower and likely less reliable feedback loop to your development team.
Yeah, the worst is a pattern that I've seen in the past of product or sales saying, these searches aren't working well. There's not a lot of specifics. Maybe they give you one or two examples. And the engineer's trying to figure out, okay, well, what's behind this? And they make some changes, and then they have what they think is a better approach. And then the product folks or the business folks do a few ad hoc searches, and they find one that they don't like. And then they're skittish about, well, I don't know about this change, and I don't know if this is going to be good enough, and you get this sort of meandering feedback loop, which is not very effective. With this approach, it's very different because we can then generate an Excel file of a set of real customer queries and say, these are the ones that improved, these are the ones that didn't improve, and they improved by this much, and it's basically transparent. And so when you aggregate the scores and you show that to someone on the business side, and they'll say, oh, wow, so it's improved by 4%. That's really good. Let's release that. So that's how the time to market can move much faster than what I would consider the kind of old school model of kind of ad hoc poking at the product.
Yeah, and so here is an example of a comparison report where we're looking at an experimental query plan and evaluating that against a baseline. And as Tito described, you can see the individual query scores which have gone up and which have gone down, the overall score for the set. And you can also see the numbers of individual queries that have gone up, down, which is a really useful metric to use for this as well. And we also when you see the individual query scores, we're also looking for any trends as well. And this then helps determine next steps. Is there something we've seen there which would drive us to go back and do more iteration, or are we now ready to move forward with A/B testing? And as Tito already alluded to, so we absolutely use human relevance testing in conjunction with other testing. So this is a really great example of when we're doing new algorithm evaluations. We'll do first offline testing using human relevance testing, and then we'll do online testing using A/B testing. Right, so another example of organic growth, as I call it, is you've got your baseline, and now you've also got a nice pipeline of search enhancements that are coming out. And this is when you can use human relevance testing to set a goal for improving search and to track progress against that goal. And you can see an example here on the right where for a particular product we're tracking with each release DCG, and we're tracking that against an annual improvement target. And this is really great for things like motivating teams and driving accountability as well. And it's also great for ongoing engagement with stakeholders. So it really keeps the conversation going. And overall, you then start to see it driving a culture change and really across the organization, a different attitude or approach to search.
All right, wrapping up here. Lessons learned, just highlighting a few key themes from the presentation. One is doing human relevance testing means getting human beings to spend time on it. So the source, identifying appropriate raters and securing the commitment of those raters is really important. So my recommendation here, if you haven't established a program like this, is to do a pilot, a small scale pilot with a small number of raters. Work through a process. You don't need fancy tools to do this. You can use a spreadsheet and see how long it takes, see whether or not there's an appetite to do it within your organization. And you may want to look at outsourcing raters to do this type of work. But securing the commitment and the getting the right raters to do the work is really important. Otherwise, the program won't be successful. And you have to make a really good conscious decision as to who will be an appropriate rater. Depending on the type of product that you're talking about, you may be able to use the general public. You could potentially get outsourced ratings work. If you're in a very specialized domain, that may not be feasible. In our context, for most of the ratings work that we do, we require individuals that have legal backgrounds. So we're able to leverage internal staffing on a contract basis, and also some internal employees with JDs to do this work. The scoping of the studies has to align with the capacity that you have. So it doesn't help to be super ambitious and do an evaluation that's going to take 3 months. That's too slow. So starting small, being able to identify where some of the problems are. And if you're in an organization that has some flexibility in terms of resourcing to throw at this, starting a pilot, showing the value of it to key stakeholders that can open up purse strings for budget can be really helpful. We started the program with a fairly modest budget, and we've been able to expand it significantly on the basis that the approach that we're using is much more rigorous, and we're able to see value from it. So doing a pilot can be really practical in this regard. Oftentimes, when we started this, we were very hyper-focused on figuring out, well, did we move the metric? You know, did the number go up? And that's obviously important. Everybody wants to know, are we getting better at search? But one thing that we've learned in our journey is that it's really important to budget time to do analysis of results and really understand, well, what's behind it. Getting a metric and say, well, search is better is great, but knowing what improved, which queries improved, which ones didn't improve that you expected to improve, and then looking at the comments and really digging into the data can be really useful, very generative for helping to identify new areas for improvement, to identify what kinds of algorithms you should be focused on. Doing a baseline evaluation, you may uncover that the majority of your problems are a matter of not being able to resolve known item intent. The solution to that is very different from queries that perform poorly because they're exploratory topical queries, where you maybe need to look at synonyms or look at word weighting. And so just knowing that the results went up or down doesn't really give you that insight. You have to kind of look at the queries and look at what's improved and what hasn't improved to be able to get work on that level. Tangible examples are really important. So when you do an analysis like this, you get a set of results back, and being able to kind of see the specific queries that are still performing poorly can be really useful. They're typically representative of a class of queries. And so if you see a class of queries that are performing poorly, you could look at a solution that can apply more broadly to address those kinds of issues. And I'll just end it and say that this type of work with collecting all these ratings is expensive, especially setting it up initially in terms of the methodology, some of the tooling, and then bootstrapping ratings for a particular product. What we've found is that over time, as we've streamlined the processes and as we're able to reuse ratings, we actually can get a lot of return on investment in the approach. So a little incremental cost, we're able to test new algorithms very effectively and leverage the investment we've made previously in the tooling and in the collection of ratings. So the work can be expensive, but we find in our domain, with as important as search is for our products, that investment is definitely, that it's definitely worth the investment. So thank you very much.
We have time for one or two questions. I'm going to run over here
Lots of
because not be
questions.
biased to one side.
Thanks, sir. I'm curious about how you identify navigational queries. I assume there's something very easy, like if you have a document ID, but are there classes of queries where you say, oh, this seemed navigational, even though the query they entered might not have indicated that?
In our domain, I would say that and this may be true of other products and other domains, unlike Google, so Google is completely long tail. It's the number and the variety of use cases in Google is ridiculous. In professional products, so if you're a job search site or an e-commerce site or us, we're a legal site, if you look at that hundreds or thousands of queries, you can easily cluster them in somewhere between 5 to 10 categories of intent. And so in terms of identifying like a navigational query, it's pretty obvious if you look at a set of queries what bucket it falls into. We don't find that there's maybe ambiguity as to what kind of document the user is interested in, but in terms of the intent of the query, that's fairly well established. And we rely on subject matter experts to do that determination for us.
Okay, one more question. All the way in the back. I feel like Rocky.
Especially in the case with subject matter experts who kind of have an expectation of what the results should be, do you have any way to accommodate results that aren't present that should have been? So a rater being able to say, well, I did this search and I would have expected this case to come up, but it didn't. It's just not in the results at all.
Well, I think there are two. That's a two-part answer. The the first part is that the way we do this, the methodology we use, and by doing document level scoring, our subject matter experts never see a complete results list. So they don't know if there's a document missing or not. So that really is not really a consideration in their mind. But the second part of the answer is that is actually one of the constraints of this type of testing, and is something that we are actually trying to solve, because this is great so far as all the insights that it does deliver, but the one thing it doesn't tell us is where there are missing critical documents in our top results. So that's, if you have any ideas, please let us know.
Yeah, this methodology is assessing the current state of relevance. It's not assessing whether or not recall is optimal. There are other methodologies to do that, and we're actually looking at a few approaches, but we're in a pilot stage of looking at how to solve that problem. We have not, we're not addressing that problem as part of this type of analysis.
Great. Thank you guys very much. Or thank you guys very much. That was a very good talk, and I guess we'll hear next year about the next next round.
Yeah, we'll
with
talk
recall.
about A/B testing next year.
Cool. All right. Thank you guys.